Hey everybody, welcome back for another segment of Bookends. He's Jason. This is our buddy Teaser. I'm Chucky. Hey Jay, I'm pumped up. It's football season. I mean, it's fun to start talking football, and I'm going to jump right into it with our team, the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, this is a Raider team that I think there's a lot of optimism for this year, that everyone's kind of looking at this team to take the next step. But you think about the Raiders, and 6-2 on the road last year, 4-2 in the division. That should translate to a playoff spot. Yet they finished, really poorly down the stretch. They were 6-3 at one point, finished the season 2-5, were 1-3 their last 4 weeks, and they really struggled defensively down the stretch. This is a team that I think can take the next step, but God, they had 7.5 wins. That win total that bettors bet over last year, it took till week 16 or week 17 last year to get them over. So they really struggled at home. They're a good team. They're a young team in some aspects. John Gruden's got this team playing well in the preseason. He's the second winningest coach in preseason since 2005. He's 17-9-2 right now, hitting over a 70% clip. Only Brian Flores of the Dolphins has a better preseason record, but a very small sample size at 4-1. What's it going to take for this Raider team with all this optimism to kind of live up to expectations?
Well, I think one of the things you brought up was they're struggling in that home field advantage. And obviously in last season, we didn't have that Allegiant Stadium home field advantage with that crowd packed in there. So their first season with fans, I think, could be a big deal. And if anything, that Seattle game, that first preseason game that they played, we saw that Allegiant Stadium is going to be loud. It is going to be a home field advantage from that standpoint. Those black hole guys are going to be going absolutely crazy. So if the Raiders can find a way to improve that home field, they're going to do well, despite the fact that they've got to welcome in the Chargers and the Chiefs, very, very tough teams at the top of their division. I think from the beginning of their season, it's going to depend a lot on that secondary. We can obviously talk about the offensive guys and where they're headed, but being able to stop things on the back end is going to have a long way to say of how they're going to do, if they're going to be able to get over those win totals, if they're going to find a way to make the playoffs. They bring over Casey Hayward, defensive back from the Chargers. He's kind of their veteran leadership. They're very, very young in the secondary. Mooring, Abram, a lot of young guys. So if they can find a way to patch some holes in that secondary, they've got a chance to win some games.
They're going to have to, because we know they can score points. I mean, like Carr a lot, he was under a lot of pressure last year. I think going into the season, he was the guy that most people said had the most pressure on him than any of the young quarterbacks. I think it was him and Mitchell Trubisky at the time. Trubisky's already moved on. He's a backup with Buffalo right now. We know the Raiders have Mariota in the fold. I think for the Raiders, they go out and they sign Kenyon Drake in the offseason. You've got a great 1-2 punch now of Drake and Jacobs. You've got Darren Waller, who you can make a case that he is like 1A to Travis Kelce. But I look at their wide receivers. Bryan Edwards is getting a lot of ink in the offseason as kind of the guy that is shining so far in preseason. But for me, the guy that has to take the big step is Henry Ruggs. They spent a number 1 pick on Ruggs. He's the deep threat. He was hurt a lot last year. And really, Nelson Aguilar was that guy. He's the guy that took the top off the defense last year. I know they went out and they signed John Smokey Brown, who has that deep speed. But I think you have to get Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards to step up as young wideouts and kind of open things up underneath for a Hunter Renfrow, for a Darren Waller, and that running game of Jacobs and Drake really to take off.
Yeah, we'll start with Carr. His over-under passing yards for the season is 4,050.5. So he's kind of right there in the middle of the pack from a passing yard standpoint when you look at other quarterbacks throughout the league and their passing yards.
I think that's an interesting number, though, because I think they're going to run a lot more than some of the other teams in the AFC West.
Yeah, and then the two other guys, and it's strangely enough that the numbers work out this way, but Jacobs from a rushing standpoint, his over-under rushing yards is 1,050.5, and Darren Waller from a tight end standpoint, his over-under receiving yards is 1,050.5. So kind of expecting an equal season from those guys, and Waller, I think, is one of those guys that you really have to look at. Really kind of shined last year, and we'll see if he can take it to another level kind of in his third year. I think that he's right up there with a Travis Kelce and a George Kittle, and you'll find those receiving yards for those guys much north of where we're at Waller. Kelce's somewhere in the 1,350, 1,360 range. Kittle down 1,100 in that range. But again, Waller has a chance to take a big step here.
I think when you look at that prop and even look at Waller from a fantasy perspective, I think through the first 12 weeks last year, he had 5 touchdowns. The last 4 weeks, though, he had 4 touchdowns. He really became that kind of Travis Kelce type wide receiver. And I'm anxious to see, is he going to kind of, piggyback off that success, or does he revert back so much, or is it someplace in the middle? He's got all the tools. I think he's a guy that can be that deep threat along with Ruggs because he's such a athletic specimen. He can get deep. He can play underneath. I think you really need Waller to be that guy, but they can score with anybody in the league. But getting back to your point, I thought really they were going to address defense more in the draft. They did a little bit, but maybe not as much as I thought. They did sign Gerald McCoy to add another pass rusher. I think some of those young kids they spent early on in Mayock and Gruden's tenure really need to kind of take that next level and be that defense that can keep them in games, because you're not going to outscore the Chargers, the Chiefs, and maybe the Broncos throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, the defense is where they're going to, like I said, they're going to win or lose games on the defensive side of the football. Getting back to Waller for a second, with that prop at 1,050.5, they're going to use him all over the field. I think that with Ruggs and Edwards being healthy, and if they can establish themselves on the outside, I don't see Waller just sitting kind of at that tight end position. It won't surprise me at all if they use him outside, use him in the slot, have him run routes that typical tight ends don't run. So I think, from a standpoint of the over prop, and if you're looking fantasy football from a Darren Waller standpoint, you're going to want to draft him early.
Especially with the last 4 weeks again. I think they started to use him a little bit more. I think you look at a guy that had 9 touchdowns last year, 3 his first year. He really took that next step, and anxious to see if he can get to double digits this year. I think you look at...
Hold on, just despite all your optimism for the Raiders and talking about that they have the offensive weapons and if they can clean some stuff up on the defense, our side of the counter doesn't really have a whole lot of respect for the Raiders. Their over/under wins is 7.5. They're projected 4th in the AFC West,
which is the worst of the teams in their division.
Yeah,
they're
9-1 to win the AFC West. So despite all this optimism, there's not a lot of confidence on the bookmaking side of things that they're going to have a good season.
I think we're going to come back in another segment and we're going to jump into the other teams in the AFC West. I think the big piece is that you look at the Chargers and they have all the tools to be a playoff team, and what Denver has done in the offseason, both offensively and defensively, and we'll get into that too. I think there's a lot of question marks with the Raiders, especially on the defensive side of the ball. We'll kind of jump into that a little bit more in the next segment. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back, and we're going to jump into the rest of the teams in the AFC West.
Locals know the STN Sports App is the most trusted sports betting app in Nevada. They have convenient sign-up locations across Las Vegas, so download the STN Sports App today.
Download and get a bonus up to $500 when you sign up at any of our convenient locations.
Hey everybody, we're back on Bookends, and first segment we really talked about the optimism for the Raiders and where we think that they'll be throughout the course of the season, and where they can improve upon, and we know they've got some talent on offense, but I think we should look at the rest of the AFC West now. I mean, you look at the AFC West and you can make a case, I think, from our side of the counter that is one of the more balanced and better divisions in football, not just the AFC. We know how good the Chiefs are, Jay. I mean, look at back-to-back Super Bowl trips, won one, lost one. Patrick Mahomes was a little bit banged up in that game, didn't play his typical Patrick Mahomes type game. They lose Sammy Watkins in the offseason. They spend a lot of money, though, to shore up that offensive line. Can Clyde Edwards-Helaire take the next step? Can Mecole Hardman, as a wideout, replace Sammy Watkins? We know that they've got Kelsey, but they're going to need a little bit more consistent wideout play. We know how good Tyreek Hill is, but they're going to need somebody else to really step up, and they think it's going to be Hardman. So offensively, I mean, this Chiefs team is awfully good, and it's not going to surprise me if they're playing in February again this year. I think from the offensive side, super talented. I look at the Chargers, new coach and Brandon Staley. You look at that defense. That's a Super Bowl defense, but they just can't seem to stay healthy. On offense, you've got really talented wideouts in Allen and Williams. You've got Eckler in the backfield, and you've got a quarterback last year that a lot of teams passed on, and Justin Herbert, who had a phenomenal season. He was just unbelievable. Can he take the next step? And then you look at the Broncos. I think from a skill position set, there's a major question mark at quarterback. But you look at this team with running backs right now, with Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams, they have the young running back there. But you look at their skill position players. Noah Fant, really young. Jerry Jeudy, really young. KJ Hamler, really young. Cortland Sutton, really young, coming back from the injury. But that's a talented group. But the big question mark is, can Teddy Bridgewater or Drew Lock get them the ball consistently. They've got a defensive-minded coach in Vic Fangio, who was the Bears' defensive coach when they had all that success. But you look at that defense. They drafted Patrick Surtain. They went out and signed Kyle Fuller, a healthy Bradley Chubb, and, of course, Von Miller. That's a really good defense. Maybe the best defense in the AFC West, but they need quarterback play. So when you look at these teams in the AFC West, how does that kind of translate to kind of some of the props and stats that we have on the board from the betting side of it?
Sure. Well, you look at the AFC West, and you wouldn't say that that's the most balanced conference in football because of the Chiefs. They're 260 favorite to win the AFC West. They're favorites across the board when we look at the NFL schedule, being 2-1 to win the AFC conference and being 4-1 to win the Super Bowl. Their over-under is 12 wins, so they're expected to win a lot of games. And obviously, you talk about that offense. Patrick Mahomes over-under 5,050.5 passing yards, so way up there in his over-under passing yards.
Almost 1,000 more yards than Carr.
Right. Yeah, and so, I mean, and you see it on the field. And you talk about the weapons that he has. And Hill, whose over-under passing yards is 1,350.5. Kelsey, 1,360.5. So they've got some guys that are really at the top of those fantasy draft boards as well. And you talk about, the other players they're going to have to step up for the Chiefs. You talk about McCole Hardman's going to take over that second wide receiver spot. But it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the rookie last year out of LSU.
He struggled a bit.
But I think in this second season now, adapting to that offense, knowing what he has to do, they also pick up a backup running back in Jerick McKinnon, who's been hurt, was a Viking, was a Niner.
He's dynamic when he's healthy, though. He just hasn't been healthy over the last 3 years.
So if he can find some health, that can lead to some good things for the Chiefs. And obviously, from a betting standpoint, bettors love the Chiefs. They're going to play the Chiefs week after week. And our boy Teaser here is kind of always rooting for the underdog, so he finds himself not being a Chief fan week after week. You jump over to the Chargers. Again, another dynamic offense with a quarterback with a high over-under passing yards, and Herbert
500 more than
4,500.5 passing yards from a Justin Herbert standpoint. So another big number that's there. Keenan Allen over under 1,030 yards.
I just want to interject 1 sec on that. I think that's the interesting part, is that Carr could be a quarterback like that, but I think with Gruden they do put more of an emphasis on running. And when you've got Jacobs and you went out and signed Drake, I think that even screams more that we want to be more balanced. We don't want to be the Chiefs or the Chargers who rely on passing the ball. We want to be a running team because our defense might not be as good as those defenses.
Right. They have to be more balanced to keep that other offense off the field. But go back to the Chargers. Keenan Allen over under 1,030.5 passing receiving yards. Now again, he's one of those guys that probably would be closer up to that 1,300 passing yards, but really has found the inability to stay healthy as we see Keenan Allen struggle to get on the field for 17 games. So more in the expectation that he's going to play in that 14 to 15 weeks. And injury is a major cause and effect on his over-under receiving yards. Austin Eckler, their running back for the Chargers, comes back. Not a dynamic running back from a rushing standpoint, gets a lot of receiving yards as well, catches a lot of balls out of the backfield. He's compared now with New Orleans changing their offensive coordinator, going to Los Angeles Chargers. He's kind of the mini Alvin Kamara that a lot of people think he can have that type of season. His over-under rushing yards is 815, but again, we expect that he's going to see a lot of passing yards.
Last year, so it's kind of... What Eckler are you going to get? I think it's interesting, too, with the Chargers is that their new head coach, Brandon Staley, was an assistant coach under Vic Fangio for the Bears, had a lot of success there as a young defensive coach, moved over to the Rams as their defensive coordinator, and he really was the architect of that defense. Spends 2 years there. We both think that the Rams have a Super Bowl caliber defense, if not the best defense in football. He now goes to a Charger team that has a lot of talent. You look at Ingram and Bosa and those guys on defense there. That's a talented group if they stay healthy. So defensively, I think the Chargers are a good team as well.
Yeah, and obviously sitting behind the Chiefs in the AFC West, despite all that optimism for the Chargers, they're still, to make the playoffs, the no is minus 150. So it's still a favorite that they're not going to make the playoffs. But I think that they have the tools there to go ahead and make a run. And the last team, before we get down to the Raiders, is obviously that Broncos team. Again, there's excitement there with the quarterback change. Very good defense. Pick up the rookie running back. Melvin Gordon's kind of been on the downturn. But it's really going to be what that young receiving core can do, and in particular, Jerry Jeudy, and how he can take this step in his second year to kind of emphasize that offense along with a dynamic tight end and Fant.
There's kind of a cool prop we have up with two wide receivers from Alabama.
The two Alabama kids,
Jeudy and of course having Ruggs up there.
Yeah, and we've got Jeudy a pretty heavy favorite. Judy's minus $2. This is head-to-head receiving yards with Henry Ruggs. Obviously, Jeudy, the number one receiver in Denver, and we'll see where Ruggs can kind of take things.
I think, though, it's interesting because I think there's some value with Ruggs because Jeudy has, I think, a more crowded wide receiver core. Where you look at Ruggs, he is the deep threat now. With Aguilar gone, he's a guy they're really expecting to step up. I think the AFC West is going to be fun this year.
Well, we'll see where Denver ends up, whether it's Bridgewater or Locke. Locke had a really good preseason game. Bridgewater, not a guy that throws the ball downfield. So we got two, Locke is the looking downfield guy. Bridgewater's the dump off for a lot of small, short routes.
Carolina got him for a year, and they shipped him over to Denver. I think they want Drew Lock to win that job. I think he can run the ball. He's a running quarterback. He's got that big arm. He can take it over the top and get them downfield. I think Drew Lock wins that job. We'll see. It's an interesting fight in preseason. But we're going to come back, and it's going to be a new segment that I think Clint Eastwood would kind of be excited about. So we'll be right back for another segment of Bookends.
Locals, here's how easy it is to start betting on games with the STN Sports App. They have sign-up locations across Las Vegas, so no matter where you are, you're less than 5 minutes away from getting started. So download the STN Sports App today.
Download and get a bonus up to $500 when you sign up at any of our convenient locations.
We're back for our final segment of Bookends, and as I mentioned, something that I thought Clint Eastwood might be proud of, and that's our new The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly. Wait a minute. Do I hear that whistle in the background? Anyway, it's a new segment here on Bookends that we're going to touch on. I'm going to start with baseball, and it's the good, the last 10. I mean, you look at the Braves 9-1, Dodgers 9-1, Giants 8-2, Brewers 8-2, Yankees 8-2. And in baseball, as we know, the bettors are just picking winners. There's no point spread involved. You just have to win the game. Those teams have played so well over the last 10 games. They've really dominated the slate, and the bettors have done really well since August 1st.
Yeah, it's baseball has been the bookmaker's nightmare, and as we've gone past,
so it's been the ugly, right?
It's been ugly on our side of the counter, and since the trade deadline, the good teams have been playing really, really well, and the bad teams have been really, really bad. And from that side of things, it's been a rough kind of sledding here in August, and guests are building their bankroll, hopefully, for football season. But, yeah, some of the teams, you talk about the last 10 games, and it stretches even further with some of these really, really good teams. The Yankees in their last 30 games are 22-8. The Brewers in their last 30 games, 21-9. And then we have three teams, the Rays, the Braves, and the Giants are all 20-10 in their last 30 games. So those are kind of excellent win percentages that are really spelling bad for the bookmakers.
But good for the bettors. I mean, it really has been good. And baseball is a tough season to beat. We've always talked about that. From our side of the counter, it's kind of our lowest hold percentage overall because you're just picking winners. And to me, the unbalancedness of it has been even greater this year, that you just have seen the bad teams really bad and the good teams really good and streaky. If you look at the bad, gang, over the last 10 games, Orioles 0-10, Pirates 1-9, our beloved Cubbies 2-8. Not very good. Those are definitely the bad teams from our side of the counter.
And it goes, even if we go into the last 20 games, Orioles 4-16, Pirates 4-16, Cubs 4-16, and the Nats 6-14. And those are all teams that kind of had an exodus out of their lineups as we hit that trade deadline. And we've got two other teams that are not bad. They're not bad teams. They were actually at the tops of those divisions fighting for playoff spots, but have really been falling apart in the last 20 games.
There's two teams that have really fallen apart, and that's the Mets and the Red Sox. Both are 6-14 over the last 20 games. But we called this segment The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly. We haven't touched on the real ugly yet.
Well, the ugliest of ugly is the Baltimore Orioles right now.
They're in the bad category, too.
They're currently on an 0-14 streak, and they've lost all 14 of those games by multiple runs. So that means the other team has covered the run line in all those games. And I don't know where the end in sight is for Baltimore, and we've still got another month and a half left of baseball season. So hopefully the Orioles can find a way, or we're going to continue to cash a lot of tickets betting against the Orioles. The other really ugly teams in their last 30 games, Pittsburgh Pirates 7-23, Texas Rangers 7-23, and our beloved Cubs 8-22. So guests are really picking on these bad teams and making a lot of money betting against these teams.
I think for us on our side of the counter, it's even magnified a little bit because when we talked about the last 30, the good category, two of those teams in that mix are the Dodgers and Giants. They're both late games out west, so a lot of parlays are all tied to those teams. And then we're looking to fade, the Diamondbacks, the Rockies in many cases. I know the Padres were kind of in that good mix for a while. They've kind of fallen off a little bit. They've gotten some injuries. We know that Tatis was out of the lineup for a while, but they're one of those teams as well. So for us, really magnified when it used to be just the Dodgers, but now you've got the Dodgers and Giants over the last 30 and over the last 10. One is 9-1 and one is 8-2.
Yeah, two of the teams we didn't mention that kind of have been somewhat good, somewhat bad, depending on that, is the Houston Astros and the San Diego Padres. Two teams that are really fighting for those playoff spots at the tops of their divisions, but have kind of been playing that 500 ball over the last 10, 15 days.
Yeah, baseball's really been rough from our side of the counter. But not only baseball, guys. I mean, this weekend you've got a huge fight going on, too, between Manny Pacquiao and Ugas. Kind of an interesting twist of this fight of what the price was with Pacquiao and Spence to what it is right now.
Yeah, obviously, this fight was supposed to be Spence versus Pacquiao. Spence was as high as a $4 favorite over Pacquiao, and Pacquiao was heavily bet down. And then obviously Spence having to drop out due to the eye injury. Ugas goes in and gets replaced, and now Pacquiao is the heavy favorite, almost a $4 favorite against Ugas. And we've got lots of props up on the fight, from round props to five ways. So despite the fact that it's not Spence versus Pacquiao, still going to have a great weekend of boxing.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, they've talked about could this be Pacquiao's last fight. I think a really good showing here, and I think you do see him fight Spence at some point just because of the handle and the excitement that it generated. We've kind of touched on everything, you guys, and as we go into the weekend, we've got this big fight. Raiders play their second preseason game. This week it's on the road. They're against the Rams at SoFi in LA, or against the Rams at SoFi in LA. Interesting, though, again, we know that they've got Carr and Mariota, and we know Gruden again. 19-8-2, second best record in preseason since 2005. They're a little under a touchdown favorite. I think that number is going to go up. No Stafford, no Wolford. You're going to see a lot of Raider play come in. So
money to be made on the Raiders, money to be made in baseball. We've got our the new sign-up bonus going on, so up to $500 for all new sign-ups, 10% of your original deposit amount. So get in today, get in the book. We also got Last Man Standing, our college football contest, $100,000 guaranteed. Pro football Last Man Standing, $150,000 guaranteed. So now's the time to get down to Station Sportsbook and get signed up for these contests.
And if you win them both?
Win them both, Last Man Standing, you can take home a $750,000 bonus. So
cool, $1 million.
Cool $1 million to take home the Last Man Standing. So get in today, get signed up. Only $25 an entry. Buy 4, get a 5th free. So for $100, get you in college. $100 get you into pro, and a chance to take home some big money.
Don't forget all of our kiosks. Skip the line when it's busy in the book. We'll see you guys next week for another segment of Bookends.